Okay, well, I know people are going to just now start getting on, so really appreciate the early birds, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Um, so I'm really excited about today's show. It's a sneak peek of RDM. And I was already telling Abhradeep that we might have to do a part two because there's lots of interest in this particular topic. So Abhradeep Sengupta, he's a senior product manager here at Reltio. And of course, I'm the director of customer engagement and community here at Reltio. The rules of the show: keep yourself on mute. Feel free to ask the questions in chat. The show is going to be recorded and posted to the community. My hope is to get that out by tomorrow or the next day. By the way, we do encourage your questions and push those into the chat, as I mentioned before. Coming up, we have a few shows. So today's a sneak peek into the world of RDM. And then on next week, leverage DVF to improve data quality in Reltio. Should be a good one. And then we are partnering with DMB, with Vinky as well. He's our product leader on Unleash Data's Competitive Edge. I'll be moderating that particular conversation. So really excited to be really involved in it's more of a Q&A kind of show. I'm going to stop sharing, Abhradeep, and let you share since I don't have another slide.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Let me share my screen. Yeah, so my screen is visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. So today we are going to talk a little bit about reference data management, and I have termed this as a sneak peek into world of RDM, but we will first initially start with some of the basic concepts around RDM and how Reltio handles it for people who are new to this world. And then I'll have some deep dive and questions which are very frequently coming from our esteemed partners and customers, right? So this is the agenda, as I said, introduction to RDM and basics of Reltio RDM, along with the components that build Reltio RDM. So that I'll be covering initially to build a platform kind of a thing. And then on top of that, we'll go deep dive into some of the areas where we receive a lot of questions and some of the recommendations that we have as a best practice from engineering and PM perspective, right? And then I'll try to leave some time at the end so that I can answer some of the questions that you guys ask. If I can't answer every other question, we'll have discussion in the community, we'll have blogs, or we'll also can have a follow-up session, right? That's what Chris was mentioning. So if I just little bit briefly talk about introduction to RDM, what is RDM? So now if I discuss data like very in a data warehousing kind of a concept, right? There are dimensional entities that take part into transactions. And when we talk about MDM or master data, we basically master these dimensional entities which take part into transactions, like let's say customer or products, right? And then for these entities, there are certain attributes which are called lookup or list of values. Why they are called list of values is basically there can be a predefined allowable set of values that is permissible for that particular attribute, right? And in my personal engagements and experience, I have seen often in very large organizations, sometimes they are technically advanced also in terms of digital enhancements, but they are still managing things at a business unit level, right, in Excel, and that creates a silo which becomes a hurdle for effective data management and data governance. So what RDM basically tries to do, that it tries to try to put a better governance model around it, standardize these values so the entire organization, irrespective of the views, they can be on the same platform, they can talk to each other about the same thing and don't feel like we are talking in different languages, right? So that's the main goal. And when we are talking about definition of RDM, one thing that I have mentioned later also is very important, right? There is very fine line sometimes for what is master data and what is reference data. I have seen a lot of debate happening around this. It depends a lot on the business use case, right? How that particular organization is using a certain part of data, and product data. I have seen few clients using product data in the reference data management sets, right? Whereas product is a very well-known mastering entity for certain other organizations. So that definition has to be like defined at case to case level. Having said that, how Reltio RDM solves it, right? So Reltio MDM, we know it's a cloud data platform. Now in RDM, it's a separate tenant, right? And you get the tenant along with the MDM platform when you get into Reltio MDM. And then there is an integration, a layer that is there. So your MDM tenant is linked to RDM tenant. You manage the different source raw values and lookup values into that RDM tenant. And when you load data into MDM profiles, that the integration between these two tenants help to standardize those source specific values. And this process of standardizing, we call it as a transcoding. So in our documentation on any discussion, you'll hear a lot about what is transcoding and things like that. So that's what in terms like simplified, if we simplify transcoding, this is basically standardization. Now basics of Reltio RDM, right? So we called about simple transcode. Now, sorry.
There is a lot of echo.
Okay. Can
People who are
someone go on mute?
So it sounds okay to me, Abhradeep. I don't have any issues, so.
Okay. So
it sounds good to me as well.
Okay. Thanks, Daniel.
Okay. So what is basically simple transcode, right? What I have understood is this concept and this ordering a sequence of how Reltio system works internally, it's not very clear to a lot of folks, right? Even when I talk to our internal folks. So what happens here, like as you see the below table, I have different source system. For simplicity, I've maintained Reltio and Facebook as separate source system. They are sending source code and source values. And then we are mapping it to a canonical code. We are giving an example for a country, USA, and then we have Reltio and FB sending different code and values. Out of those values, I have also like users can tag, okay, this value coming from this source is my canonical or standard value. As you can see, true or false, that's a Boolean mark. What system does is when you're trying to load a MDM profile for a particular source, let's say I'm trying to load a MDM record coming from FB, it first looks, okay, in the country field of that incoming record, do I have the source code that I have defined for FB? So which is US, right? So it's first for that. Okay, if country code has US, it will accept that. It will convert it into USA, right? And that's how the transcoding will happen. If it does not find US, it will next check whether I have the source value for that specific, right? So source value for that FB is America, right? So I will try to look, the system will try to look, okay, if I have in the profile for that attribute, whether America is present or not. If it is present, fine, it will again convert it successfully and then go ahead with the process of loading the data. Next, if it does not find anything, US or America, it will check whether canonical code is coming, right? So if FB itself is sending USA, I'm fine with it because that's my canonical code. FB somehow knows that and they are sending, the source somehow knows that and they are sending that. So I'm fine with it. I'll go ahead with that. Even canonical value is okay. Point to be noted here, the canonical value here is from some other different source. But if you load, as you can see on the right hand side box, right? If you load United States with crosswalk FB, it will still accept that, right? Because this is the sequencing that it is going and it accepts as sequence number 4. Now, if all the 4 cases fails, when will all the 4 cases fails? If you load something which is coming from source system, but the value in country code is 01, then it does not know that. It does not fall into anything 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's where it throws an error. That's where it says I don't know this, and there is a transcoding error. And there are subsequent process that happens that I will discuss. But this is how the sequencing is for simple transcode. Now, if I move forward a little bit, right, we talked about simple transcode, but there are other variations of transcode also. So if I talk about two major things are hierarchical and reverse transcode. So what is hierarchical transcode? So it's the same thing for a simple transcode, but here you have a lookup hierarchy or dependent lookup, whatever you may call it, right? So country and state is the most popular example of it. So you have a mapping, you are doing a standard mapping, right? A standard simple transcode. But here you have defined a parent and it looks that whether the incoming data has a valid parent. So TX, let's say the source FBA, if I take the source as FBA again, So TX is the FB is sending, and my canonical mapping in the RDM says, okay, it should be called Texas across the organization. That's my standard form. That's my canonical form, right? That's fine. It works. But then if my record is coming as a country is equal to India for that particular states, and in my RDM, I have defined US as the correct parent. So it will also look at that, right? Because it's a dependent hierarchy, dependent lookup or hierarchical lookup, it will also check whether the valid parent is coming or not. If it finds that, okay, it is coming TX Texas, which is valid mapping and everything for this particular source, but the parent is not correct, it will be a hierarchical, like transcoding will fail, right? And it will be captured as an error. We right now, we don't segregate between, okay, this is the error because of the transcoding mapping is not present, or this is the error because there is a wrong parent that is associated with that. Everything is captured into one big bucket. We are going to improve that process and have different exceptions bucket for these two separate kind of errors, but that's work in progress. Right now, it's an invalid input and we capture it as an error. Reverse transcoding is something that has been recently introduced. So what happens is, a lot of time when you are loading data from, let's say, Salesforce, right? You are loading data, and when you are loading data from Salesforce to Reltio, you transcode a value, right? Let's say organization type or a customer type. You are loading that data, transcoding it. That's fine. But often a time, the data after processing in Reltio goes back to the same source system, right? So Salesforce gets back the same data. Now, when Salesforce gets back the same data, often a type it calls like it through a get entity or a get relationship kind of API. And if I send them my standard canonical form, it might not understand. The system might not understand. Yes, my RDM, the end goal is, okay, the entire organization will talk in the same language, but often in real life practical implementation experience, not everything happens parallelly at the same time, right? The Salesforce system might not be ready at that point of time to ingest and process the canonical code. So what it needs to know, it needs to know what it is called in my terms, right? So we need to again go back to the raw value that Salesforce understand, and that's what we called reverse transcoding. So you can now enable the reverse transcoding while calling these two APIs through a parameter called reverse transcode lookups, where you give me, okay, I want to reverse transcode this particular value for this particular system, and then it basically sends back the raw value from the canonical code or value that we have in Reltio, right? So that's what two different types of transcoding that we currently have. Moving on to another important parameter as we're talking about, and this is probably the most asked about parameter. There's a lot of impact in different places and a lot of confusion around it regarding, and that's why I have a complete separate page with the entire information, right? So there is a parameter called resolve lookup code. Now, what does resolve lookup code do? So resolve lookup code, till some point of time, I think few releases back, it was at a tenant level configuration, right? So whatever you define the value, it's a Boolean true false kind of a value. Whatever you define at that level, everything, every RDM attribute at a tenant level will take that value, right? And we change that. We change that based on multiple feedbacks. As of now, it's an attribute level. So you can define it for backward compatibility. You can still define it at a physical tenant configuration level, but then you can override it for certain attributes, right? So the default value for it is false. What does false mean? So false means when you are loading a data, let's say Salesforce is loading a data and Salesforce is sending, okay, let's say my address type is B, okay? So that's coming from Salesforce. When I put resolve lookup code is equal to B, the data that gets stored in the database, MDM primary database, right? Depending on whatever cloud system you're working on, it stores that particular raw value that's coming as B. Okay, that's what false means. What does true means? True means it will first transcode and then store. So you're storing the lookup code, the standard value. So B will convert it to business, and then you will store the business in the database. So depending on that parameter for that attribute, address type or whatever it is, right? It will be stored either as a B, which is source raw value, or as a business, which is canonical value. Now, what is the implications of it, right? So if you have it false, that means you are having a source raw value. So one good part about is you are not losing the original value coming from the source, which is kind of helpful in terms of auditing and all that, right? And the other thing is, because you are storing source raw values and the transcode process is happening, if someone is looking at the record on MDM UI, the transcode is happening on the fly, right? So if you go ahead and change that mapping, okay, tomorrow you might say like, okay, my B is not business, my B is means B bilateral. I'm just giving a random example, right? So if that mapping gets changed, you don't have to do anything as a user or as a customer. It just automatically changes because the database, it's still holding B. It knows the new mapping is to bilateral and it will change, right? There's no pain point. But the downside is, because Salesforce is sending B and then maybe Facebook is sending X. So I'm storing B and X both, right? But while I'm using it in matching, it not always know that it maps to same canonical code. So the mapping might show like same values, but it might be showing twice in the UI, right? And we have got that feedback. So the recommendation here for us, and the reason for which we made it like an attribute level, is if you are using something for a match or for a cleans, right? Like let's say state is something or country is something which is very often used in matching, very often used as a cleans input. In those cases, keep the resolve lookup code parameter as true. Everywhere else where you don't have those obligations, you can keep it false. And the other question, the pain point, right? Why we keep it default as a false is, if you keep it as a true, you are storing canonical code in the database. So if you change a mapping, that database value will not get updated automatically, right? You have to reload the same record again into the MDM database, so that while loading it second time, it respects the updated mapping and updates the value going into the database, right? And that changes the last update date kind of that for record also. Whereas if you store the raw values, you change the mapping, it happens automatically, nothing changes underlying database, right? So there are pros and cons in both. We know it creates a lot of confusion, and if someone wants to modify it in middle of a implementation, let's say there is some pain point that they have to take care of, we are right now discussing about how to improve this entire scenario and still provide the entire flexibility that the customer has today with Reltio system, right? So we are working on that, but as of now, this is what it is, to clear all the confusion and have some recommendations from Reltio side. So now we have most of the basic things cleared out. We'll talk about some of the components, right, that Reltio RDM has. So let's start with activity log, right? So activity log is something that we generally store, like, okay, what is happening across the tenant, RDM tenant, right? Who is changing what and at what point of time, what is getting changed, all those things is called activity log. You can have a collective activity log, or you can have activity log specific to a particular lookup type. All this data can be huge, right? And that gets stored into a separate activity log tenant, which Reltio manages under the hood for every RDM tenant, right? And then automatically the UI, anybody accessing the activity log from UI actually have access to that activity log tenant under the hood also. These APIs that we have a lot of requests coming from customers and partners to have those APIs. We're again working on that. There are certain processes that each API needs to go through before it is certified to be used and exposed for external users. Right now, it is only internal, being used by our UI and our own folks for supporting and investigation. But we will try to get it available for you guys as soon as possible, right? So as I was already saying, right, like added lookup type, sources or lookups, or changing anything, deleting anything, all this along with the date and user who made the changes, that gets captured here, right? And then you also have a activity log filter where you can provide different attributes, like, okay, what are the type of activity on which I want to filter, or who is the user who is doing what are the activities on certain date range, on certain canonical values. All this can be a filter activities to kind of slice and dice the data. One thing here important is, from a conceptual perspective, is that we call one activity, but that activity, not always one operation will be one activity, right? So an activity can have multiple operations, and the limit is one activity right now is allowed to have 100 operations. So for example, if you load 100 values into a lookup, then the activity log will have only one activity with 100 add operations, right? And then why I'm explaining it that is because there are tasks at the task. When we talk about workflows and tasks, you have to again keep remembering that these activities are grouped together, operations are grouped together at activity level, and you take actions on the activity level. Another very popular questions, and again, I accept that we need to, and we are working on update the documentation and make it better for RDM role based permission. We get a lot of question, okay, this is my requirement for this particular set of people, what role should I give so that they can do such things, but they cannot do these things, right? And let me be very clear, the most confusion comes at the right at the bottom. I have a role admin tenant. That's the confusion part, right? So what happens is a role RDM, we all know this is a view only. Users can kind of read lookup types, lookup code sources, but they cannot make any changes. Role RDM edit is it gives you edit access, but then this edit access is for existing lookup types. Okay. Users with this role are not allowed to add new lookup types. If you want to add new lookup types, you have to have role admin tenant. This is not explicitly called out in our documentation. We'll make changes there, but just to clear out the confusion is edit gives you access to edit existing values. Admin tenant is needed if you want someone to create lookups in your RDM tenant, right? So that was the most asked question here. Apart from that, we have role RDM review and role RDM suggest. So these are workflow related. We will talk about workflows at some point of time. RDM suggest is kind of for initiating a change request in RDM, and then review is accepting or rejecting those change requests. On the right hand side, I have a specific code snippet coming from like my metadata permission or metadata security configuration file. This is again a common requirement that is showing up a lot nowadays, and I have taken it exactly from a POC tenant that we have. So this is basically in the metadata security or permission file. We can have a role-based filtering, right? So here we are talking about organization type, which is a RDM bound attribute. For a specific role, I can say that, okay, this role will only have access to these three different organization types: dealer, owner, group, and contract, and they can have this kind of access, right? Read, create, merge, basically everything. So when they work on the MDM UI, users with this particular role, they will be getting these particular values with the entire access, right? But if nothing is mentioned about any other organization type, then those should not be visible. Okay, some of our partners have already implemented it. I don't think we have explicitly documented it anywhere. It is kind of still not in a self-service mode. We are planning to bring this somewhere in the configuration side of it, so that users can use a UI and kind of do a self-service instead of editing the JSON configuration files, right? That's the goal, but this is possible today. I've already talked about workflows a couple of times, and then I also want to talk a little bit more about workflows and unmapped values, right? So let's start with unmapped values. So when we talk about unmapped values, what happens there, right? So let's assume, right? So if from certain source, Salesforce, you are loading a profile into the MDM database, and you also have to like kind of enable some of the parameters to have this value. I'll discuss about those later. But if you have enabled your tenant to create unmapped values, right? So what will happen is when you are loading a data profile data from a Salesforce, if it figures out that there is an attribute which is RDM bound attribute, but there is not mapping present in the RDM, right? So maybe Salesforce is sending C instead of B for address type, and I don't have any mapping in my RDM for C to what canonical value it is, it will not reject the data at this point of time. There is also request for us about rejecting that entire data load. We are considering that as a separate and additional requirement, but at this point of time, what we do is we load the data, but we also load in RDM that it's an unmapped value. It goes into the unmapped drawer, and then users can easily understand from the unmapped triad, okay, well, these values I need to map for MDM to work properly, right? So that's a kind of a governance that we are trying to create at this point of time. Obviously, rejecting is another way of having it reviewed by the source system itself. We'll come to it later when we build it. And then somehow related to that is, okay, around the governance, we also have workflows. Yes, there are feedback that the RDM workflows are still a little bit behind the capabilities and flexibilities that MDM workflow has, but we will improve that. And we'll discuss that again later in this presentation also. But basically, what RDM workflows allow users to basically make changes, and you can basically have an approval or a rejection workflow. As of now, this is mostly a one-step approval, and then you basically have to configure workflows in the RDM, right? So you have to register the RDM tenant for workflow service, and then have to have that workflow feature turned on, and that necessary role you have to provide. If anything is not working as per expectation, you can reach out to us. We are also improving the we can also, like, when you have unmapped values, you can map unmapped values to canonical values through drag and drop. I'll show it in the UI, and you can also do that also in the suggest mode, and we have improved that experience to some extent. So basically, some unmapped values coming from Salesforce as C, you can say, okay, it is also mapped to business, right? C is also means business, and you can drag and drop it in UI and suggest it maybe the data governance manager or someone who owns that particular data set of address type can then take care of your request, right? And then we also have the collaboration service where you can have leave comments on RDM UI, right, for better collaboration. This is how in my tenant, I don't have a workflow enabled right now. So this is how I have added a screenshot. This is how it looks like. On the right hand side panel, navigate right hand panel, you have a button for workflows. And when you are specifically inside a single lookup type, which is phone type here, you can see what are the workflows that are associated with it. And you have the dates, the changes that we are talking about, right? And then on the left hand side, you can see, right, I can also click on this eye icon, and then I can see what are the exact changes that I have been asked to review. So this is how it looks like. Now we'll little bit talk about RDM data model and how we can modify the RDM data model, right? So I will take you little bit to the UI and try to show you how it looks like. So we get again a lot of confusion or questions regarding RDM data model, and we accept the fact that we have an option to improve the user experience around a lot of things here, right? But I'll show you how it is right now, and then I'll also discuss about how what are the things that we're trying to improve. So if I talk about the data model, right? So here you can add lookup types from here. You have on the right hand panel, you get to see activity logs and workflows and stuff like that. This is activity log. I don't have workflow enabled. Okay. And for a data model, you can click on here and you can see, right, we are talking about lookup type, item type, child. Okay. You can have a description for better understanding these things. Things are a little bit hidden, which I was talking about, having a better UX, where the users don't have to dig deep to understand different aspects of this lookup type. And you again have start date and end date, and you can have status where you can turn it on or off. You can auto generate canonical code. And what is pretty important and powerful is you can add custom attributes. So these custom attributes, and you can define the data type, you can define it whether it's a must or not. So this basically gives you the flexibility of a data model, and every separate lookup type can have their own custom attributes, right? So this is where it kind of gives you the flexibility of data model customization for each lookup type. Now, this is at this level, what we can do. Now you can basically go inside it, right? And you can see these mappings. I have mapping from DNB, I have mapping from Reltio and FB, and then you can see all these slight blue corners, which are showing that, okay, this value is now getting used as a canonical value. Now you can click on here on the canonical side of it. Remember, some of these things are only possible at the canonical side of it, not at the source level. So I have defined custom attributes item type GSO for this lookup type. I can put a value here. Okay. And I can also add a parent or child here. Okay. To create a kind of hierarchical value chain, if I may call so. Right. And one thing is here is you can click it here and you can basically add anything under the hood as a parent. There is a feedback that we need to be more tighter around the rules, what can be added as a parent. So if I have item type child, here a user has to know, there's no hard and fast rule that I can set here that item type parent is the parent of this particular canonical lookup type, and I have to have select a value from there. It's kind of a loose where users have all the flexibility. We'll probably improve this for a better data quality and data governance and have more rules around it to make sure that users are forced to make certain entries and they will not be allowed certain entries, right? So this is what it looks like. You have ability to leave comments here, okay? And then you have this gear icon here, which basically gives you the same set of things or changes possible that is at the lookup type level I was showing it earlier. Now here, as you can see, you can basically choose any of these source type to be a canonical value. There's no hard and fast rule that FB has to be always. As you can see, for this, it is Reltio. For this, it is FB. And then you can edit settings or insert comment here, or I'll go here, right? You can delete the values if it's not a canonical value. And if I go directly here, as you can see, right, even at the source level, I have an option to put description. Again, a feedback was there that these descriptions and things like that are not at the first level of UI. All these will be available, your description, your start date, end dates, your custom attributes and hierarchical information. All these are part of your API responses, but in UI, it is like you have to know where it is and you have to go there. So the description is possible here. Note that like I can't have a custom attributes or a parent child kind of a relationship at the source value level here, right? So this is what I was talking about mostly when I was talking about the data model changes, right? So let's go back there. I wanted to just showcase this in the real UI, how it looks like, all right? And then we also have import, export, and streaming capabilities, right? I'll just touch base on what is possible. So import is one of the pretty important aspects, right? And then there are a lot of feedback around improving the import specifically for users who are not technical, because right now what we allow is kind of a direct API based calls. If you have MDM and RIH, that's helpful. A lot of our customers use RIH and use the underlying APIs for integration and building RIH recipes. But if not, then it is mostly a direct API calls, right? We have the RDM API documentation. I have given the link here and we'll be sharing this. So that's a pretty good place to start. And then in terms of streaming, so we support RDM today, as I think we have support for AWS SQS and Google PubSub. And basically any change that happens in the RDM, right, which is RDM is not supposed to change very frequently. It's kind of a slowly changing data. But if it happens and if the downstream demand is that we want to ingest it in near real time, then you can set up these queues and stream the events downstream, right? And then customer can configure this streaming events, and then get the downstream system can pull the data from these queues, right? We have the documentation about setting up this API for self-service configuration of streaming, but you can reach out to radio support also if you have any questions. And on the export side of the things, basically you can export the RDM data, and the file format is CSV and JSON. The APIs right now mostly work with JSON. So if you want to use it in future, it is better to have JSON as the format, and then you can choose whether you want like hierarchical information, whether you want audit data and localization, custom attributes, and source code and values. One thing that I must tell as a like kind of a limitation for this export is export works on the mappings, right? RDM mappings. So the unmapped values that we have, that might not get exported if you export the data. But having said that, like if you have enabled this, like the on the MDM side of it, right? When you search, and I'll come to search, when you search for this data, even if you lose the unmapped values from the RDM data, and because it's not part of export, you cannot get it back, the RDM side searches will still continue to show the profiles which have like lookup, like transcode errors, right, associated with it, which is eventually like some sort of unmapped values, right? We can still figure that out probably, but it's a like a convoluted way of getting that. We are trying to see if we can improve the export capabilities to include unmapped values. That will help our customers a lot instead of in terms of taking the backup and use it, like taking the export and use it as a backup. Now coming to search, localization, and deployment options. So the localization is basically to support different language codes. I think we support 17 different language codes today, and the list of languages are available in this documentation, and you can raise support ticket if you want, if you have any confusion, or if you want localization to be enabled. How localization works basically is you have to have the browser settings for a certain language, and then depending on the browser setting and your localization setting, the API basically converts the values into the required language for that particular country or region, right? So that's what localization is all about. I know we can have multiple different discussions about localization. We'll probably can have those in the Q&A session, right? In terms of search, there are two different kinds of search, and even for indexing also, right? So search in RDM UI is not as powerful as a MDM UI. We don't have a fuzzy or a specifically type ahead kind of a thing. You need to have a kind of a whole word and then hit on search or enter, and then it will show you that particular lookup type. There is a feedback again to improve the search capabilities. We will be prioritizing and working on that. Whereas on the MDM UI, in the advanced search option, you get to check for records that have RDM transcode error is equal to yes, right? This is what I was talking about in the last page. So index RDM lookups option should be enabled in the physical config of MDM tenant. This is a physical configuration. So you have to raise a Reltio support ticket. There are a lot of parameters in RDM, which is in the physical configuration of the tenant. And then those are not readily accessible by partners or customers, and you need Reltio support tickets every time you want to change that. So we have a bigger initiative of improving the self-service capabilities. We have initiatives to improve the performance and stability, to harden the platform, and we are trying to make as many things as into self-service as we can, right? And then once you have this, the other important thing that we also talked about, right? Like if you are loading the data into MDM, then if it does not find any mapping in RDM, you want to get those into the as an unmapped drawer in RDM. So you have to make sure that you have publish RDM errors enabled in MDM, and then track transcode error is also enabled. So both these options need to be enabled if you want to like automatically track these values inside RDM, right? And as I have probably mentioned earlier, RDM is right now available in GCP and AWS, and depending on the MDM tenants and depending on the contracts and discussions, We provision these tenants in GCP or AWS. AWS has a presence in China also right now, but we are not currently available on Azure specifically for RDM. We have MDM on Azure, and we have a plan to make it like consistent cloud platform across MDM and RDM. So RDM on Azure infrastructure is there in our roadmap, right? Now, there are some of the frequently asked questions that we get, and I'm planning to go through this because I'm expecting that I see there are 17 chats and all of those questions, but I might be covering some of those yet. So let's go quickly through this, and then we'll pick up questions, right? So how many RDM tenants can be linked to one MDM tenant? So one MDM tenant can have up to 5 linked RDM tenants, and you can have as many as RDM tenants can use one RDM tenant, right? So there's no limitation on that, but for one single MDM tenant, it can max out at 5 RDM tenants, right? For different attributes kind of thing. Do we have any limitation in terms of number of lookup code and values in RDM? It comes up a lot because at some certain point of time in the past, we had like certain numbers, which was big enough, but we still had this limit. But right now we don't have a limit as such for number of lookup code values, but we have received some of the questions and concerns from some of our customers, right? And I want to discuss that here. We don't have a number of lookup value limitation, but a single lookup mapping, when you say, right, one canonical value is, let's say, map to 10 different sources, so that we called a single mapping. Now this single mapping is basically one single object under the hood in the database, right? And there are certain objects limit that some of our customers hit in terms of that object, right? So we are trying to build as I said, right, we are building like improving the stability and availability and hardening the platform. So we are also building a monitoring system where we can look at, okay, whether any customer is reaching near that limit and alerts and alert them, right? But then there is a recommendation here also, right? So if you have, what we have seen, if there are more than around 3000, and it depends how many custom attributes are there, how long the description you have put in, and it depends on a lot. But if you have 3000 source values coming from different source mapped to a single entity, there is a chance that you can hit the object, right? Now when you look at why this they hit the limit of 3000, it often happens that, okay, I have 3 separate attributes coming from sources, right? Attribute A from the source, attribute B from the source, and attribute C from the source. Okay, I have all possible values of 100 for attribute A, I have all possible values number 100 for attribute B, and all possible values of 100 for attribute C. So the entire combination is basically 100 into 100 into 100. That can be my possible values, and then I am mapping it to 10 canonical codes, right? So that means per canonical code will have a lot of huge mappings, right? So that's where the problem is. I think this is somewhere like we are transforming the data also. We are using RDM to transform and map, right? It is better and it is recommended if we can have some transformation outside the Reltio before we enter like that 100 cross 100 cross 100 values. We can limit down that and then do use RDM for mapping those transformed values to a canonical code. That way it would be easier and less load on the RDM system and the less impact on the performance, right? Okay. Third question is there any limitation for hierarchical transcode? This is very popular. I still get a lot of questions. In case of hierarchical transcode, child lookup values with errors are not propagated to unmapped royal list. So people get confused. This is something which I would call a limitation. As I already said when I was defining the hierarchical transcode, it is because we do not segregate different buckets for different exceptions. We are doing that and we are planning that and we're working on that. Hopefully in near future, you will be seeing that hierarchical transcoding will be supported for unmapped royal list. We are aware about it. We're working on it and we need some improvement in the backend, right? Can we have multiple parents for one lookup type? Yes, you can have multiple parents for one lookup type. So what I was showing in the UI was that, okay, you can have any value, canonical value as a parent of a canonical value. But here we are talking about one lookup type having multiple parents. A popular example that I see for our customers who are using multi-country is, okay, my status design code depends on status also, my status design code depends on country also, right? Because the countries use different things. So this, to work properly, you have to use multi-parent transcoding. You have to enable, which is again into physical configuration. If you have this kind of a mapping, hierarchical transcode, where one lookup type has multiple parents, enable multi-parent transcoding, right? How to handle case sensitivity? A lot of time, again, complaints come that, okay, my values are same, it's just something is capital, something is not capital, something is init capital, and RDM is not handling. Again, this is by default false. By default, it is not supposed to handle that. We might change that. There's a discussion going on, but right now we have a parameter called case insensitive transcoding, which will fix the problem, right? But by default, it will be false, and it will treat it as two different values if the cases are different. Why transcoding not working for end-dated crosswalk? Again, there's a parameter that says transcode by end-dated crosswalks. It's again false by default. So that disables transcoding if the crosswalk has delete date populated. So crosswalk with delete date populated means it's inactive. We don't spend resources on transcoding those crosswalks, but you can control that by this parameter. How do we get total number of lookup values for a specific lookup type? You can basically use this get endpoint where you give the tenant ID and lookup type, and then underscore total is the service endpoint that gives the total number of lookups for a specific lookup type. I have marked the lookup type as in bold. You can remove that portion, and then it gives the entire total of number of lookups for the entire tenant, right? Then again, what is the limit of lookup values that we can get back in a single JSON response, right? Now, this one, again, I think we can improve our documentation. There are multiple options for this. And I'll slowly go through one by one, right? So the maximum number of values in a get response when we're reading data from RDM is by default 100, right? And then you can increase that to till 1000, right? And if you go beyond 1000, you have an offset parameter, and basically you can use that offset parameter in every call to like move your cursor kind of a thing in chunk of 1000, right? So you read 1000, 0 to 1000 first, 1000 to 2000 second. But this have a performance issues that we faced if the number is really high, right? So we started recommending DB scan endpoint, right? Now we have two scan endpoint. One is simple scan, the other one is DB scan, right? They are technically different. DB scan directly goes and scans primary storage, so it's a very highly performing, but one drawback for DB scan is does not support filtering. So if you need, while you are getting records from RDM, if you also need filtering and better performance, then you can use the scan endpoint. It is better than offset, but lower than DB scan, but it gives you a filtering capabilities. Basically works on Elasticsearch, get the index from the Elasticsearch, and then reads the primary storage for all the other details that you have requested for. So depending on your requirement about filtering and your requirement about performance and number of lookup values that you want to read, you have to choose the correct endpoint, right? Next, advanced search in MDM UI returns profiles even though no transcode error is present. So this happens. The primary thing that we look is, okay, whether we have reindexed entities. So if you have fixed some mappings in the RDM and it is not showing directly into the MDM, then it might be something that we have not done the indexing. So if you can index it, that will fix most of the cases. One caveat there is, when you do this search in the search API, and this is something that we have figured out recently for one of our customers, and we are again planning how to improve it. The search basically shows you errors for reference entities also, right? So if you have a reference attribute, which is a linked entity, you are searching for HCPs, but you have a location and there is an issue in the location, the search returns those HCPs also, though that HCP does not have any problem. But when you click on that HCP in the search result and you go deep into that, you see no errors, right? Because the UI of that profile only shows records which the user can fix from that UI, right? So if there is an issue in the reference attribute, which is a linked entity, a separate entity, you cannot fix it from there, right? You cannot sit on HCP and say that I can change the state and all that, right, from here. So That's why the two validations are different from a search side and from a UI side. We are trying to make it consistent, right? Why MDM UI show two different values with brackets in dropdown? I think most of you people know it, but then again, if someone is new, we have a parameter called show lookup code. And if then code and value is different for canonical, in the dropdown, you will see both the values, right? I think that helps and you can control it again. There's a question that was asked specifically for this. What is enterprise RDM add-on? We have a line item in our licensing called enterprise RDM add-on. It's technically the same solution. It's just that if you need additional RDM tenants in your licensing for MDM, based on your contract, dev, QA, and prod, you get one RDM tenants for each MDM tenants associated. But if you need additional for any need, right, then that's the line item that we refer to in the licensing playbook, right? It's just that, nothing different. Include disabled lookups, as you can probably understand from the name. It's like endpoint for MDM side in the drop down. This parameter will control whether you still see the disabled lookups in the drop down or not, right? If it is set to true, then it will return disabled RDM lookups. Otherwise, it will be filtered. What are some of the limitations of data load process in Reltio RDM? So one, this is a very highly requested thing that we are working on. So partial update, right? So the one drawback is if you are not using RIH or anything like that kind of a iPass kind of a tool, then you don't have an integration platform, right? So you have to depend on APIs, which is a kind of technical, and it also does not support partial update at this points of time. That's a work in progress. It will be available as soon as we complete it. That will solve a lot of problem in the pinpoint. But if you are working it with MDM and if you have RIH, the recommendation is use RIH. And as of now, the post can handle max 100 records. So it's a little bit pain for a large data set, right? Can RDM support special characters in the lookup code? Yeah, it was not possible earlier, but right now we have this particular endpoint where you can provide like URI list in a post call, and then those calls in those RDM canonical codes can have special characters and it will not create any problem. Quickly, some of the recommendation. How do I get back my RDM data in case I lost my RDM data, right? So another thing is about RDM. I call it something that will be fixed pretty soon, but the backup that we have is kind of a manual backup. So it's not automated and kind of improved, that we are improving in terms of hardening the platform. But from a customer side, what we can do is we can take export of RDM data in JSON format and store it in a version control tool. This JSON file can be then used to load the data back, and you can also like basically go back to any version also, right? Through any ingestion supported method, right? And as I have already mentioned, the only limitation is that like it will work for mapped values. As of now, we don't support unmapped values. So getting back the unmapped values is a little bit pain, but with the improved backup method that we'll release by like 2024, it should be solved. How does resolve lookup code affect cleans operation? I have already discussed about it. Again, something that we are improving on it. We have a couple of complaints about it. So our recommendation is something like state that has a cleans in that is used as a cleans input or match input. Set resolve lookup code is equal to true. But if someone has started with resolve lookup code false, which is by default, and customer might not know at the initial stages, so that becomes a pain point. So what we'll do as a fix is we'll include and we're working on the solution, but we'll probably make sure that inside the API, the platform handles it, right? It should not be depending on resolve lookup code value. It should handle and transform and do the transcoding if needed, so that the cleans works perfectly. What is level of Azure support? I have already discussed about it. We are planning to bring Azure, like RDM on Azure pretty soon, to make sure that our customers who are using Azure MDM have RDM also on Azure. Recommended way to manage unmapped RDM values. So the recommended way is to basically drag and drop from UI and map it. We understand that there are too many, doing it in a bulk is a difficult from UI. But if you do it from UI, it takes care of underlying things, right? It removes it from the unmapped drawer. Whereas if you do it through API, you can do it in bulk, but that kind of leaves the values unattended in the unmapped drawer. We have this as a feedback. We'll probably try to improve that in some future release. Okay, one of the very popular questions: can I use Reltio RDM for enterprise level governance of lookup values? Right. This is where we're talking about Reltio RDM being enterprise RDM and not a supportive system for MDM. Yes, Reltio RDM can be used, but there are a couple of things that we are currently improving that we feel is in certain cases you might need it, right? One is that integration with, right? So if you don't have the MDM tenant associated with it, then you don't have access to RIH in the console, and then the loading the data, though it's not like a very ongoing kind of a job, we should say that RDM as an enterprise RDM should be loaded at the initial when the development is happening, and then it will be very less interaction with loading data or updating data, but it's still we need to improve the ability to load the values. And the other one is security and role permission. It's there, we only have 4 out of the box roles. There's not enough ability to add custom roles which can control, okay, I want to get access to this particular source, this particular lookup type, even this particular canonical code, right? That's a very common requirement in a lot of places for enterprise RDM. So we will improve that, and that improves the capability for using RDM, Reltio RDM. If you have very complex and this kind of requirements around security, permission, and integration, then we also have customers who has like customized the MDM platform as an enterprise RDM, and it works perfectly. Obviously, it will not have the intelligence of executing the RDM transcodes. But if you don't need that RDM transcode capability for an enterprise RDM, then you can obviously consider FDM platform, which gives you better security requirements, better integration, and better flexibility, and all the capabilities that, let's say, that our MDM platform has, right? So it depends on requirements. And last one is what is the recommended way to delete specific source and lookups associated with that source. So you can find all the lookups for a specific source with a specific endpoint, and then you have a post call for _delete endpoint where you can give the list of URIs for a canonical code. So it can basically remove the entire mapping for those canonical codes, right? And then you can remove the source from UI. If you don't want to remove the entire mapping for that canonical code, and you just want to remove that particular raw value from the source and keep the canonical code and other mappings, then you basically have to download the data or export the data, modify the data in the JSON format and reload it, right? And basically that will treat as an update. So depending on your requirements, you either have to do a delete operation or you have to do a update operation, right? So that's where I'll end. I see 25 questions, and yeah.
So Abhradeep, don't get stressed yet. So everyone, thank you so much for coming to this RDM call. Lots of really great questions that unfortunately we didn't get to most of them. I did post this on the community, put the link in there several times. We will have a follow-up, Abhradeep. And I just sent you a Slack message to get this scheduled to start answering all these questions. So that's going to be a future Ask Me Anything with no presentation on RDM. Lots of interest here. We'll definitely do a follow-up on this particular topic for an Ask Me Anything. And sounds like we should also go deeper. So thank you,
Sure.
Abhradeep. Lots of great information here. Go ahead, Abhradeep.
Yeah, so we have all these questions captured, right? And we'll
Yep.
do a follow-up on Ask Me Anything kind of a follow-up, right? Okay.
Yep, that's right. So yeah, this was really great. Also on your calendars, most likely, I just sent it out. We do have another call next week, so hopefully some of you can make it to that one. So until next time, and I'm getting all these questions, they're still coming in. So this is great. But until next week, we'll see you then. And then again, there will be a follow-up call, I promise, that we can get this on the calendar as soon as possible. So thanks, everyone.